If you're going to make it racial, you're the one doing the lynching and the burning and the killing and the shooting us down with tanks, shooting us down with machine guns, lynching and burning us for 400 years for nothing.
Sorry, I knew he was gone. I tried to have a tidy ending, but...
marry my sister, I wouldn't have.
You...
Well, that's it. No, I think it's very sad. I like Muhammad Ali. I do feel, and you know more about the Muslim thing than I do, that he has been led into something that is probably very terrifying.
Of hooligans, I mean killers. And they intend a total segregation of the races. That's what they want. And they want the final Holocaust. They want genocide, white genocide. That's what that man preaches, not him. He can't preach anything. He has trouble saying hello. But his leader, all of you, British, Canadian, American, Hawaiians, anything that's not black is evil and rotten and contagious. And they want to exterminate it. And it was born in prison. Malcolm X found it in prison. He'll implement it in prison. And they shoot down their enemies in cold blood. They ferment the riots in our big cities, in Detroit, in Newark, in Milwaukee, in Philadelphia, in Watts. The Muslims rush in and fan the flames. They're an evil pack, semi-literate, like that one.
That's where we got to leave it, I'm sorry. Something we'll have to take up another time. So. It's a very serious and very frightening subject, but that's all for now.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to The Field Between. My name is Ahmed.
I'm Yasmin.
And today we're joined by Muhammad Ali and Hiba Siddiqui, both former University of Pittsburgh students. Muhammad is facing some charges related to campus Palestine-related activism. So we're happy to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Great. So I kind of want to start at a really high level here and just give us an overview of the charges and what's kind of going on with that. We'll get into a little bit more detail later, but I just want to lay the groundwork for the conversation.
Sure, yeah. So what the situation is at the moment is that I have been charged with several felony level charges, several misdemeanor charges, and I think one or two summary charges. And all of these are relating to a specific incident that happened on June 3rd of 2024. If you'd like, I can actually list out the specific charges that are
sure, yeah,
brought again. So thus far, I have one count of F2 aggravated assault, one count of F2 conspiracy aggravated assault, one count of F3 riot, two counts of M2 obstructing the administration of law, one count of M2 failure to disperse upon official order, and one count of M3 disorderly conduct. I guess no sorries. Additionally, at the I think it was at the preliminary hearing level, two charges against me were withdrawn. So that was one count of F2 conspiracy aggravated assault and one count of F2 aggravated assault.
And just kind of based on these charges, you would imagine that University of Pittsburgh was at one point just guerrilla urban warfare, just chaos in the streets. But Yasmin, you had something?
I was going to say, I think it might actually be helpful to give listeners a little bit more context to what the protests looked like and what the kind of atmosphere was on campus. So there were two different encampments. Yeah. And these kind of charges are from the second encampment. Yeah. So I think we can all probably weigh in on that, having attended, I guess, myself as a professor and just sort of different vantage points to kind of explain, because the encampments were really peaceful and really lovely and a really interesting kind of social experience, and the kind of charges that came out of them, just to me as someone who is very much just kind of an observer, really don't match the tenor of what was happening on campus.
Yeah, actually, I want to go even a step further back before we get to the encampments themselves. Now that we kind of have a little glimpse into the charges and how this has all ended up since then, but I kind of want to know what the atmosphere was like at Pitt and what the hostility was toward SJP specifically before even the encampments, or maybe even during, right? Just Palestine campus activism in general, because there's been a spate of news stories and reporting that specifically list University of Pittsburgh as one of the most hostile campuses to free speech. So Muhammad or Hiba, like if we could get you to comment on what was the atmosphere toward campus activism and specifically SJP before all this happened.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely touch a little bit on that. So I've been involved in, or I was involved in, rather, Palestine activism on Pitt's campus, right about since the beginning of the genocide. So this is around October of 2023, I think. The university always had a very antagonistic sort of stance towards Palestine activism in general, and I think calls for divestment in specific, where the students that were a part of SJP, or even some faculty members, tried to get into meetings with upper levels of the University of Pittsburgh administration, meetings with financial officers, to try and see the areas that Pitt may or may not, right, have invested directly in Israeli, either the military apparatus or the state itself. And the administration was very adamant in giving those individuals who wanted to figure out what was actually going on the runaround, right?
Yeah.
So there was never any actual, like, very clear-cut answers that were given to people who wanted to figure out whether or not this was a thing that was happening, right? Like, if it's not a thing that's happening, then the administration can come out and say that, right? They can say, hey, we are not directly investing in either Israeli bonds, Israeli military apparatus, and the Israeli state. That's not something that they've done, right? And on top of that, besides like the administration being very coy in its method of response, there have also been, obviously, the crackdowns that have happened, I think, on students and I don't know if they've happened to faculty members, but there have been definitive repercussions on the student body who has engaged in Palestinian activism. The most poignant example that I can think of, and the most recent example that I can think of, was the banning of SJP as a student organization. That was recently reversed by a federal district court. Very, very happily, I think. We received that news when that happened, because it shows that the university is engaging in like a contracted effort to limit, I think, specifically Palestine activism, or even besides Palestine activism, progressive activism in general. For example, I was, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit long, but I was the president of a progressive student organization, and we were informed by SJP after they had been going through the lawsuit for a little bit, that the University of Pittsburgh had people that were like watching like our Instagram pages, SJP's Instagram pages, in order to like figure out when events were happening and stuff like that. So
this is actually, sorry to jump in, but this is like a really great thing to highlight when so to kind of just summarize what you're saying, the SJP was going to faculty. You guys were trying to meet with, not faculty. You're trying to meet with administration to get an understanding as students of the university. Where do our tuition dollars get invested? Are they tied up in Israel, which is committing an ongoing genocide and campaign of ethnic cleansing, or not, right? Like, we're not making an accusation one way or the other, but we as students feel that we have the right to have that understanding. And Pitt is just not telling you yes or no, and then they give you this runaround, which this happened at the city level as well, is these funds are so massive and so obfuscatory, and they're really hard to unwind. And so they give you this, dribble about, oh, it's just so complex. It's hard to understand. Nothing's owned directly, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is, you, as an investing institution with billions of dollars potentially invested with a financial institution, you do have the power to ask that financial institution to start to give you some clarity about where the dollars are invested. And so this is also in the context of, again, we're speaking about specifically University of Pittsburgh, but this is also like, it's hard to remove it from the context of the wider campus crackdowns and crackdowns on free speech that are predicated specifically on silencing pro-Palestine free speech, which we see now has kind of spread in really insidious ways to also opening the door for policing in terms of immigration and other sorts of crackdowns. But so you go to the administration, you ask to see this information, they tell you no. But the other thing that happened, they didn't just leave it at that. It's that they took the additional step of surveilling their students and potentially putting them at risk because they saw them as a threat and did not like where that free speech was going. So I want you to talk a little bit about the surveillance, but I know from just kind of observing this from the outside is that it wasn't just the University of Pittsburgh. It was done kind of hand in hand with these kind of shady, I'll call them like citizen vigilante groups that would also like give lists to university and police and federal governments and say, hey, you need to surveil these people specifically.
Just to jump in here real fast, I have one note about like whether professors have gotten backlash. There was one professor at the School of Education. I won't say his name, but you can easily look it up just because I feel like algorithms can weirdly like target people. But he was the executive director of the Center for Urban Education, and he was removed from that position for basically speaking out on behalf of Palestine and for trying to kind of like do programming on campus related to Palestine. And I will say, I don't think there's been enough publicity about his case, even among like other faculty. And I think it speaks to how like sort of fractured the environment is at Pitt specifically in terms of activism. So I just wanted to kind of call attention to that in terms of like repercussions that faculty have suffered. That's definitely the worst case I'm aware of. I also wanted to say like, it is interesting the similarities across campuses and also the differences. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Mohammed and Hiba, but I think in Pittsburgh specifically, the city police actually didn't get very involved, which on the one hand, you know, I guess is positive, but it also makes it all the more egregious that it was like campus police that were assaulting our students. And that ultimately, like if Pitt made the call to, for example, drop the charges, they would just be dropped. Like there isn't really municipal involvement the way that, for example, like the NYPD were involved at Columbia. Is that right?
Yeah, no, certainly. Like something that I've like tried to stress whenever I'm talking about this case is the fact that like specifically with like Muhammad's case, the arresting officers, if you look at our docket, are the University of Pittsburgh Police. So the University of Pittsburgh had, were the originators of these charges. So it's not the city police that's doing this, it's the University of Pittsburgh Police. So they just as easily could have decided to not bring these charges forward to this extent, not pursue this to the extent that they've decided to pursue this, but they are, and against their students at that, and this case has, or these, Palestine activism and the way that the university has been responding to it in so many instances, like you were mentioning, Yasmin, has like resulted in, people being fired from their jobs. Muhammad's already experienced the consequence of being expelled from the University of Pittsburgh, which has like radically reshaped the way that we've had to think about like the future. And like, I always, try to give Muhammad his flowers in the sense that, oh, geez, that was loud. I'm gonna have to say that again. But I always try to give Muhammad his flowers in that he's done a really good job of just like getting back on the horse and, continuing education online, taking it in stride that, there's going to be an added year to his completing his undergraduate. And, but like it's reshaped the way that we have to think about our future. And these are really serious consequences to be facing.
What I think is really important to highlight in this broader conversation about like surveillance and these charges and the way that, we have people who are within the faculty's departments, people who are students of the university, is that they are being fired from their positions, they are being expelled from the university, and they are being pursued with criminal charges, all in a way that does not involve either like the city government or really allows for widespread sort of information or involvement about these things, right?
Yeah.
I think that one of the key purposes of the extent to which these charges have gone, or the fact that, for example, I've been expelled, this faculty member was removed from their position, is that it serves to create an environment of fear, right? It serves to create an environment of repression. And that is something that inherently benefits institutions like the University of Pittsburgh or institutions like Carnegie Mellon, for example. I remember, I think it was at the beginning of I don't know if it was the beginning of the 2024 fall semester or the beginning of, I think it was 2024, yeah, where CMU instated like new quote unquote protest guidelines, where they expressly stated like, hey, this is not something that is limiting your freedom of speech, but anytime you want to do a protest on campus, you have to contact the administration, you have to get pre-approved approval, and you can only limit the number of people at your protest to like 20 people. And it's like, what? You are very directly limiting free speech. And you are claiming not to do that, right? Pitt instituted a similar policy. I think it was to a lesser extent, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't instated, right? And I feel like Pitt, because they are this weird amalgam of like a public-private institution, where they have like a bunch of shareholders that aren't necessarily like the state of Pennsylvania, they function in a very strange way where like, for example, I'll directly talk about like some of the surveillance stuff right now, right? Like you'll have Zionist organizations on campus that are making threats or like exactly like you said, like sending lists of students to either other Zionist organizations in Pittsburgh, to the administration, and they aren't really getting any backlash from the university.
I just want to, I want to take a chance to contrast the treatment toward, or like the hostility toward SJP versus the very real threats that some of these Zionist organizations have made, right? So I know there was an instance where, the SJP just did a very innocuous study or something at the library. Everyone wore their keffiyehs, maybe had some like decals on their laptops, and that was the extent of it. Totally silent, studying for exams, etc. And they sent in the police after them. I don't know if anyone got charges from that, maybe some trespassing charges or something like that. But certainly, faced with police and threats, whereas
I believe there were some lesser charges like for honor code at the university.
Yeah. At another in another case, someone made a threat toward one of the, maybe it was an SJP member, but this was after Israel had done that terrorist attack in which they bombed a bunch of civilians using pagers that were set to explode and caused havoc, injured thousands of people, killed a significant number of people, and disfigured countless. But someone had made a threat saying that they were going to give a pager to a student at an SJP event, and then my understanding is that those students then went to administration asking them to do something to protect the students, and not much was heard from administration then. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so in that incident, I think it was actually is this organization like I think it's a far right Zionist organization called Beitar, and they had actually posted on their Instagram story that they were going to be handing out, I think it might have been pagers or beepers to like students at SJP events. And the those students like who are involved in planning that event are like incredibly frightened, and they're like, I remember like talking to some of the folks there, and they were like, should we cancel our event? Like, we don't want to put anyone in danger. Like, like I just don't, we just don't know what to do. And like we were like, they were very, very frantically trying to get in contact with an administration, being like, hey, there's this like very real threat that people are making against, like these like, pro-Palestine, like largely like Muslim and Arab students. Like, what should we do? Like, can you do something? And received no response. And so it's like the ways in which the university has clearly demonstrated a kind of like favoritism towards, like what can't even be really considered like that incident that happened should not be thought of as like free speech. Those are threats that are being made to students, you know. But like to have no administrative action or recourse, or even like no comment from the university that like this creates a hostile environment on campus, here are some resources that we can provide to students who might have been affected because of this threat. It demonstrates this level of like, like bias and discrimination that these students are facing, who are, themselves part of the University of Pittsburgh, who pay tuition dollars, you know, that go towards these administrators. So there's this very wild double standard, that Zionist folks at the University of Pittsburgh face versus anti-Zionist, student activists, or just students in general, are facing.
I think it's such a great point of like whose free speech is protected, right? There's been a lot of like weaponization of the idea of free speech, and then like a whole lack of protection of free speech in other instances, and it's kind of jarring and interesting. Like, is it always that everyone has a right to protest and to kind of give their point of view, or is it sort of depend on what suits kind of like ultimately really the administration's like donors?
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's more the latter. The threshold for what is a credible threat seems to change, and maybe that was part of why that court had to reverse the Pitt's specific hostility toward SJP by banning it from campus. Is that if you are an outside Zionist group and you're trying to get SJP to be banned, you just have to have some inkling that you're under threat or that someone's vaguely under threat. Whereas if you're a student who's coming and saying, this is a very direct, explicit threat, I have I have good reason to feel threatened, they just don't take any action. The burden of proof is much higher. Was there
Oh, no. Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful. I was going to see if we could talk a little bit about the kind of, before we get back to the charges, like kind of the nature of the encampments. So there were two on our campus. The first was in the summer of, gosh, what was that? Was that summer of 24?
I don't remember.
Or it was like May. It was like the end of the semester.
I think it was April.
April to May, yeah.
Yeah. And they were super peaceful. There was a lot of teach-ins. There was a lot of just kind of like hanging out. It was sort of really interesting to see. I think that kind of like type of protest hasn't been seen on student campuses for a while.
It was also technically not on campus, right?
It wasn't, which I think was a kind of key part of the response. Because again, like, not that I'm looking to praise the Pittsburgh City Police, I'm definitely not. But the mayor at the time did kind of show some restraint. And so it was like right across from campus. And I think that there was no charges from that protest that I'm aware of, right? It was fairly just like innocuous.
So that is actually untrue on a technicality.
Oh, really?
Because I think the one person that was charged on Pitt's campus. They weren't charged on the city campus. So, and by city campus, I'm specifically referring to Shenley Plaza. But yes, there I think was at least one person that was charged that I know of for sure.
There was.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
They were also a student at the time, and they did go through like a academic hearing process. Um, they were not expelled at all. Like they just had to.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Mohammed, you were the only student who was expelled. Is that true?
As far as we know of, yes.
Yeah, there was a
Like
lot of
with
like
regards
probation
to,
things, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. So with regards to either of these encampments, I have been the only student that has been expelled. Yeah.
Before we get to the second encampment, I wanted to say a quick word too about the honor code. It's been really bizarre, and this has been a talk among a lot of the faculty, just like how inconsistently it's been implemented, and how kind of like obscure and like obtuse, like intentionally the hearings are. Like we've only been able to get one faculty member into most of them, and that person's done like an incredible job being an ally for students. But it's like a lot on that one person. There just hasn't been good communication with students about who's allowed to be in the room with them. So some students didn't even know they could have a faculty member, which, obviously would create like a slightly higher degree of accountability with the administration. It's just been a very strange process. And I hope that one thing that comes out of this is that there will just be forced to be more kind of clear rules so that like if you are choosing to kind of take an activist stance, at least you kind of know exactly, the stakes that are involved. Because I think that, to be fair to a lot of students, the stakes were not clear.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I can talk a little bit about how like the obtuseness of the university hearing process. Because for example, right, like I think they've changed this recently where you aren't allowed to have like legal representation in the room with you. I don't know if that's correct, but I think I remember seeing something along those lines. But back when I was going through my academic hearings at Pitt, so this was in the fall of 24. This was in the fall of 2024. And these hearings are like not recorded. They are entirely operated within the Office of Student Conduct or Student Conduct Affairs, I think. Um, it's a very strange environment, right? Like I was allowed to have like my mom there with me at I think both hearings. But other than that, like besides quote unquote dedicated support people that you can bring, I don't know the extent to which these hearings are like open and or able to be like um unbiasedly like looked at. Um they seem to be like very closed off.
Yeah, it's like you're kind of
And
being tried by the people who are responsible for your punishment, in essence.
that is exactly correct. Like for example, at my level two conduct hearing. So this is for conduct hearing. A level two conduct hearing is, I think, a hearing that is like for quote unquote more egregious violations of the student code. But effectively what happened was that there was a jury of people who were all part of the university administration trying to determine whether or not I should be kicked out of the university. And like I've made an appeal on this process, right? And I've said, hey, there are like, I think many things that are wrong with this. Um, and I think the response that I received was that, well, you can't really say anything about the way that we have procedurally done this because we have abided by the procedures that we wrote ourselves. And therefore, you can't really like appeal this process. And I'm like, if the process is like structurally made so that it is against students, like you are a single, thankfully, I'm someone that has like plenty of support within like my family, within my friends, within student activist spaces, within like the faculty. But if you're somebody that is like facing the university as an apparatus by yourself, it's harrowing. It was scary for me. And I like had my attorney there. I had legal representation there with me to make sure that like everything went mostly okay.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine like just if you are a regular student, somebody that has to face like the entire weight of the administrative apparatus coming down on you, like what that would feel like.
We know, I mean, two things. We know a few other people who are also facing charges. I don't think anyone else is facing charges to the degree that you are, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit later and your thoughts on that. But yes, that's exactly right. Like, you are obviously being subjected to a pretty, like a great degree of scrutiny and kind of persecution for having, exercised your rights to free speech. But someone with less support in the community, I mean, we know people who have lost jobs. We know people who have whose housing was destabilized because of this. They're not really able to make ends meet. Their lives have just totally been upended. Again, you would think that based on the charges and the degree of punishment that's being enacted, that they, firebombed the Cathedral of Learning or something like that. But it was for trying to set up a peaceful encampment.
I should just quickly interject, though it's not the focus of today. We also know like a number of young people who are not students who were charged and who, like, that was sort of the repercussions were very severe in terms of their job situations.
Yeah. Secondly, I think that this very much the process in which you kind of have to fight the university in relative obscurity and being kind of singled out and isolated, where you are being tried by the very people who are, you're trying to appeal to the people who want to punish you. And you're set up by very nature of the process at a huge disadvantage. And it kind of feels like it's a fruitless endeavor. Very much mirrors the legal process. So, Muhammad, I was at one of the hearings. I can take this out if you want me to, but from what I could follow, the argument of the other side, one thing that the lawyer was trying to make clear to the court is that the way that these outside groups, Pitt administration and Pitt police and the prosecutor function together, whether or not it's like an intentional conspiracy and they're talking to each other behind the whatever, blah, 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 that is irrelevant. The very nature of the process and of these charges, the way these systems work together inherently puts you at in an impossible position to be able to prove your own innocence in this case, because you are again being subject to scrutiny by the same forces that want to see your speech silenced. They don't want any of this sort of speech. Like, Pitt doesn't want free speech on campus to this degree because it's bad for their shareholders, bad for its investors, bad for its endowment, etc. And so it has, through its own police system, which is much more extensive than I ever thought. It's insane how many Pitt police there are. And to what degree they're militarized. Working with the prosecutor and, again, these outside kind of shadowy groups that are surveilling students, and you're kind of just caught under that process, and they're saying, well, we're not like shaking hands in secret back rooms, and so there's no conspiracy. You're just imagining this. When in reality, that doesn't really have to happen for there to be something that has the same impact as a conspiracy. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, a lot of that rings very true. Like, if you have like a bunch of disjointed groups, but all of them have been like raised with the same, or raised is the wrong word, I feel like, inoculated with like the same sort of values, who have been brought up in the same sort of spaces, and who believe the same sort of things about the same sorts of people, then it doesn't really matter whether or not they have, exactly like you said, been talking in shadowy rooms. Like, their political interests are aligned. And I think that, for example, if we, this might be jumping ahead a little bit, so please stop me if this is something that you guys want to wait on. But if we want to talk about like the second encampment, for example.
No,
right?
I think that'd be great. Definitely like
it.
lay the stage with that a little bit if you want to explain how it was different.
So, like the greatest level of collaboration that we saw between police departments was not necessarily between city police and the University of Pittsburgh Police, rather between all of the different university police departments and then also state police. So we know, for example, that Josh Shapiro was instrumental in bringing down the encampment at the University of Pennsylvania. That is something that is also true in this circumstance. Both, I think the city and the county both attempted to mitigate the amount of harm that would happen to protesters who were inside of the second encampment. While the state police, I think, was like there in riot gear. I remember the night of, or I guess this would be like the very early morning of the 4th of June. So this is like maybe 1 or 2, 3 a.m. And you have this line of riot police that are entirely in like militarized gear, right? Like they have riot shields, they have like face coverings, like they're wearing Kevlar vests, blacked out, and it's horrifying.
They also, I mean, yeah, I remember being there a couple of nights and just seeing them line up. They came out, like you said, full blacked out riot gear, holding assault weapons, some of them, and then others holding like what looked like assault. They're just designed to look like assault weapons, but they fire maybe like bean bags or rubber bullets, but like still you can kill someone with that, especially at the range at which they were standing, in close proximity to the students. It's all very threatening.
And just to give a little more context for listeners who aren't in Pittsburgh, so the second encampment was actually on campus property, and that seemed to kind of create a really large difference in how the university responded. I think also just there was a lack of patience or increased militarization. And it was also the summer, so less students were here, and I think it was maybe harder to kind of hold ground. But the ask was still the same. The ask was just to meet with the chancellor over divestment. Like the ask remained fairly simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing that I will say to clarify, I was not involved at all with the organization of the second encampment, and I don't know the extent to which students were involved in the organization of the second encampment. I don't necessarily know the makeup of the people who are on the inside. Mm-hmm. I was on the outside for the duration of that period. But even as somebody that was like mostly a spectator, right, you could see that these people who were on the inside of the encampment had been functionally up for a day and a night, right? Like they were worried about like police crashing into the encampment. There were people who had like their heads bashed open and people who were thrown downstairs by police officers who were on the inside and I think had to leave because they were so worried that their wounds were going to like become incredibly unmanageable.
Yeah.
And
and just to talk about how much the policing itself and the tactics that they chose to deploy heightened the situation. I remember, again, I think we were all spectators here, but they cut the people who were in the encampment off from food and water as much as they could, meaning also like medicine and bathroom breaks, etc. Ironically, just reproducing the very same situation that they were protesting against in that's happening in Gaza. But the police were not sent to de-escalate. And I'm wondering if you kind of want to say more about specific police tactics and behavior.
Yeah, no. So it's very interesting about the Pittsburgh police, especially, or the University of Pittsburgh Police and like the police tactics that were deployed, is that we see a lot of more psychological tactics in an attempt to indirectly wear protesters down. Through exactly like you're saying, like cutting off food and water, cutting off access to like restrooms, to medicine, right? To just like, and how we have at night, like you were saying, like these police officers all decked out in riot gear. We also have these blinding lights being blasted on the inside of the encampment, preventing those inside the encampment from sleeping. And obviously, we do have this very direct brutalization of, people inside and outside of the encampment, like Muhammad was talking about. But it's very you see this combination of these two strategies basically aimed at sort of, you know, almost like, I don't know, like your point. I really appreciate your point, Ahmed, that like you're basically recreating the exact environment that these people are protesting against. Um, because it's these exact same strategies that are
Yeah.
being employed,
And they're saying, meanwhile, they're
So,
all saying, I mean, this happened at like a lot of universities, especially, also Columbia. But, they're saying like campus is a war zone. It's a war zone. It's a war zone. Like, or we're trying to prevent it and de-escalate. Meanwhile, they are the ones who are going to war against their own students in a very real way.
Also, just like from a very practical standpoint, and this is like not wearing an activist hat, but kind of thinking about like what the administration could have done differently. It was the summer. They did not have to do that much for this to probably have fizzled out. I know that's maybe not like, I don't know if it's like it's not an uplifting thing to say, but just like the way that they responded, I think really backfired and just didn't even make sense tactically. Like it was just kind of like a trigger happy, violent response.
I think that goes to show. Sorry, Ahmed, go ahead.
I was gonna say on that, maybe we're going to the same place, but like, I think the trigger happy violent response is not even about accomplishing that strategic goal of putting down the student movement.
Yeah,
it is about signaling to outside groups and investors that they will happily punish whoever they want to be punished.
I wonder if it is that like intentional. Maybe, I don't know. But I mean, there have been other administrations, and I don't think this is a positive thing, but like Brown University that have kind of like done kind of stupid piecemeal agreements that have also kind of quashed like the goals of the student movement. But like Pitt just really didn't try anything with that kind of nuance. Like,
but Brown ended up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think it's just also like the University of Pittsburgh, as like part or like invested in the interest of like the city of Pittsburgh. There are like plenty of, I mean, like we've been pointing out, like the variety of like Zionist organizations that exist in Pittsburgh specifically compared to like the majority of other American cities. Like the 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 University of Pittsburgh administration, I think, to a larger extent, has a vested interest in being perceived not just as like, uh, not just in like, quashing these movements, but like quashing these movements in a way that demonstrates some kind of alliance towards,
Yeah.
these broader Zionist organizations that have their interests in, who are in like Pittsburgh. So like, and we've seen like these like communications. I don't know. I don't want to be I don't want to be redundant and just like go over treaded ground. But yeah, like I don't know. These I think that's why we see the University of Pittsburgh not necessarily, just making, an agreement and then just like letting it fizzle out from there. They need to appear very, very directly against these sort of anti-Zionist, pro-Palestine, students and like community members.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's just kind of playing out in different ways in campuses across the country, depending on like the local dynamics. But I mean, there are plenty of other campuses for sure across the country that have like similar Zionist interests that they have to, have to kind of think about. I think also Pitt has not had like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the same kind of student activist culture or numbers as other universities, which makes in some ways the students more vulnerable. But I'm really excited to see the movement sort of growing. And I think really like the best thing you can do to get students excited about a movement was honestly like banning SJP and then having the ACLU sue. Like I think it just kind of really, if anything, raises intrigue and gets hopefully more people who are not that kind of aware or plugged in, like interested in the issue. Because I think there are a lot of people who just like there's a lack of knowledge, but it's not as if they wouldn't be interested in supporting the cause.
Yeah. So I want to return to the second encampment and just quickly hit on, and remind people, what are they alleging happened here? This is kind of where, the charges come in. And then I want to get into the kind of the court case, the system, how that's been going, and the position that you're in now. But yeah, take us to that second encampment. What was going on, and what are they saying happened?
So the allegations that are coming from the University of Pittsburgh Police Department are that there was on June 3rd a riot that allegedly harmed a bunch of police officers, where there were people who had, again, allegedly.
I'm sorry. This is just like laughable because we just spent the first 30 plus minutes talking about how the police have just been brutalizing and threatening students, and there's just like it just makes me so mad that there's no way for students, some of whom faculty who have seen pushed down, bruised, bleeding, etc., they can't sue the police officers for that same level of brutalization. Okay, so tell us about this, and tell us about kind of your entry into the quote unquote justice system. And has justice been meted out?
I'd also love to hear just about like the solidarity between the defendants, how that's been, just being in community with other people in this moment.
Yeah, I think I'll answer Yasmin, your question first. With regards to being in community with people, I think that it definitely has brought me a lot closer to a bunch of folks. I think at the same time that there have been many people who either don't know or don't know the extent of this case that has been brought against me. And that's not something that I hold against anyone, but it is something that I have noted is happening and probably occurs because of like a bunch of structural factors, right? Like, I mean, the amount of reporting that has happened on this has like sort of fizzled out. Like, people don't really know, or I think could have expected that this sort of case would have lasted for over a year and a half.
Yeah. Just to, jump in real quick. We actually hosted like a panel of, defendants who spoke here to
Right.
a body of people. And one of the things that people, when I was inviting people to the event, they were just like, wait, that was a year ago. I was like, yeah.
Yeah, we were shocked about how much of the broader community, people who like, I think have good intention and like are very pro-Palestine, like didn't know about the details.
Yeah.
Of state and institutional repression would end, right? And that hasn't happened. So with regards to like community support, I am not at all surprised, right? Which is not to say that, again, this is not anything that has to do with people who have like their best intentions at heart, but for people who have like busy lives, who do have to deal with like jobs and housing and just living, right? It's very difficult to stay informed and learn and be proactive in these circumstances, especially if, for example, right, as a person who was charged at these things, I am afraid that my speaking out will have a negative impact on my situation. And
It's a hard catch-22. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, precisely, right? I feel like that's why there are many, many lawyers, and I feel like my attorney had given me this advice at one point, but now he was like, yeah, just talk to people. There are many lawyers who are just like, no, you can't talk to the media, right? Like, you can't talk to reporters because whatever you say, right, might be used against you. At this point, though, like just based on how egregious the situation has gotten, I feel like unless we speak out, nobody will really know about what's going on. And that is a very, very scary thought.
Can you talk a little bit about, so again, of the batch of defendants, your case and your charges in particular seem, or not seem, are quite excessive. And I wanna get your thoughts and your lawyer's thoughts on why you think the university and the university police seem to be going after you in particular.
Muhammad's charges relative to the defendants in general are on the more serious end. They're also not alone in the nature of their severity, but they are relatively alone in the nature of their prosecution, meaning that Muhammad has not received any plea deals or any ARD, which stands for, I think, Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition Program, which is essentially a program where once accepted, the individual would participate in whatever the prosecution deems fit.
That's usually community service or like fines or restitution in some way.
Yeah, depending on like the nature of the situation, like it's also if it's like a DUI, right, they might be asked to like take a certain class or something, right? And then have their charges essentially dropped and removed from the record entirely, right? Muhammad is alone in the extent that he has not received any of these offers whatsoever, compared to all but one of the other defendants, and that other defendant is Muhammad's co-defendant. So that's the sort of uniqueness in this case.
Laying the ground here a little bit, I think, is important because there have been 25 individuals that have been charged in total. And 23 of those 25 people thus far have been offered plea deals or ARD agreements. And ARD agreements are only offered to people who have no previous criminal records. So before this incident, I did not have a criminal record. And I think that it is, to touch a little bit upon like why I think this is happening. There is a very clear, I think, political animus towards myself within the context of this case. We've held like easily over a dozen hearings at this point within the Pittsburgh Municipal Courthouse, within the Pittsburgh Allegheny County Courthouse. And it's been very weird with regards to how this case has been prosecuted. For example, when we were at the municipal courthouse level, I think at a preliminary hearing, we had the prosecution had requested for a continuance because for some reason an officer who was not listed like on the affidavit of probable cause was unable to make it to the hearing because he was on vacation. Now, myself and my attorney, I think rightfully said, why would we continue it for somebody who wasn't even listed on the affidavit? And then the prosecution's response was, well, if this isn't something that you want to continue, then what we'll do is refile felony charges and incarcerate you. And we think that incarceration is something that you should already be going through. Now, this is absolutely nuts to me, right? Like it kind of feels comically
They're
stupid.
saying that because this person who wasn't listed was just on vacation, didn't show up, that they're like, well, you know, yeah, he didn't show up, but we still want to try you. And if you don't want to go that route, then we can just arrest you. Those are the two choices you were given.
Essentially, they were like, yes, we need to continue this hearing because this officer is not here. Of course, like I was not at fault for that, right?
Yeah.
Like I had no way of influencing whether or not this officer was on vacation. And for some reason, they decided, well, actually, it is your problem now. And it was also apparently the problem of my parents who had flown in across the ocean from the UAE to be with me and attend this hearing.
That's insane. What, do you have a sense of like, did your lawyer tell you like what would have happened if this was just like a different case, or like what would have normally happened? Would the judge have just thrown it out in any other case?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I feel like that would be likely.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. That's insane. Okay. All right.
well, so I mean, and like the situation just gets weirder from there, right? Like, what I mean by political animus as well is that like, the people that were charged come from a very, very large amount of like racial, ethnic, religious backgrounds, right? There are people from a bunch of different places. Um, the political aspect to it, I think, is crucial because of the fact that the university was repressing this protest because it was a Palestine protest, right? They will say,
Mhm.
oh, well, there were people who were not allowed on university property. I think it's very, very obvious that the level of repression has occurred because it was a Palestine protest. And additionally, we can see that, like, we have many people who can attest to this, that the prosecution at one of our hearings while we were at the municipal courthouse was wearing an Israeli flag pin in order to, like, I don't know, demonstrate their support for a certain political affiliation. And this is like continued or has been like a connecting thread throughout this case. So after this case has moved from the municipal courthouse to the Allegheny County courthouse, we have had four different judges. So the first judge that we were assigned at the county level was Kelly Bigley. And Judge Bigley recused herself as soon as she saw what the case was. We weren't given a reason for it, but I feel like someone could assume why a judge wouldn't want to be on this case. Maybe they're afraid of like being associated with Palestine activism. Maybe they're afraid of like not being pro-Israel enough. Um, but yeah.
Well, it also could have been because you were you had prior attended jail oversight board hearings, and Judge Bigley is one of the people who presides over that hearing, so she knows you. But we don't know.
We don't know. The second judge that was assigned to us was Judge Beth Lazara. Now, the circumstances with Judge Lazara are exceedingly strange, right? Now, I will say that I feel like if you could describe this case in one way, it would be very, very weird because I don't think, oh, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting a call from someone. But I don't think I've ever heard of a court case where you've had four different judges on the same case, uh, who like have recused themselves, or three judges, I guess, at this point have recused themselves. Um, and one of the judges has recused themselves in a very interesting fashion. So, Judge Lazara, for example, was prepared and willing to try our case in her courtroom until, right, my attorney forwarded a selective prosecution motion. And what that is that it states that I have been prosecuted differently than other similarly situated co-defendants with regards to the same incident on the basis of some classification, whether that be race, ethnicity, gender, political affiliation, etc. Right? Now, this motion was denied by Judge Lazara. And upon that denial, we had filed a motion to reconsider the motion for selective prosecution. At this point, Judge Lazara recused herself. And among other things, one of the reasons she cited for recusal was the fact that she has an affiliation with the University of Pittsburgh. If you've had an affiliation with the University of Pittsburgh, and that's something that is one of the reasons for why you have recused yourself, why would you not recuse yourself as soon as this case came forward?
Yeah.
Like, it has been several months of this case being in her courtroom at this point.
Several people who have been prosecuted already, like for this case,
in front of her, where she has presided over like both ARDs and I think
plea deals.
plea deals. But at this point, she's like, no, I have to take myself back because, well, I am affiliated with the University of Pittsburgh. She recuses herself. The next judge, Judge Keita Bridges, also recuses herself. We don't get a reason for that one. And now we're in Judge Jennifer Sattler's courtroom. Now, at this point, we are waiting for trial. It was rescheduled from September 15th of this year to February 9th of next year. And we also have a request in for a status conference on the selective prosecution motion reconsideration. Judge Sattler has not responded to the status conference request, so we're assuming that the trial will just be held in February. And that is, I think, a fairly good summary of what has happened thus far.
Yeah.
I mean, can we say this, or I'm not saying that this is the only factor by any means. And again, just to your point, like, I think it is really important to note, like, how diverse the movement that the coalition that kind of was at the encampment and organizing was. I know a number, for example, of like young anti-Zionist Jewish people were arrested. I mean, that was like a huge contingent of the folks who were arrested, people across racial backgrounds, across class backgrounds. I mean, is it too simple but yet obvious to say that, like, I mean, you're not Palestinian, you're South Asian, right? But you are like a young brown person that was visibly like, I mean, I don't know, that seems like there might be a racial factor here. Like, were there other people of, I mean, I guess I have met other people of color who were arrested, but I wonder if that's playing any part here, that your name is Mohammed. Like, I don't know, could it be that simple that that's part of it? I mean, you're not even Palestinian, but it's not like these people know the difference.
Like, Palestinian and Pakistani are spelled close enough. So
I mean, I have had that happen as someone who is half Pakistani. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because the other thing is that, the defendants themselves are from a diverse set of racial and religious backgrounds. Of the defendants who have been charged with felonies, Muhammad is the only Muslim defendant.
Right.
And like, it's a situation where you have like a brown Muslim man who is also somebody who has been very, very publicly, like historically has been very publicly active
Right.
as part of the Palestine organizing space since the beginning of the genocide. It's just, it feels so, it feels like they're trying to make an example out of him. And I've like, this was the sense that, you know, like, at least I've had from when the level 2 conduct hearing was happening till now, that, you know, you've created the perfect example and you're pushing so hard because, you know, this is your person. This is the way that you show everyone that, you know, those who, you know, stand up in support of Palestine publicly, you know, those who, and especially those who are, you know, brown, those who are Muslim, you know, should be afraid of what they say and where they say it and how they say it.
And it's so frustrating in a way too, just because, like, I think one thing that's so incredible about this movement is that it is so multiracial and multi-religious. And so it's just kind of interesting that that's like kind of the narrative that's being, I mean, I guess it's not like shocking or surprising. It's almost like trite to be like, in America, certain people suffer more for activism. Like, I guess, you know, that doesn't take away from that, but.
Yeah, I think a couple things to point to in what you said also is just, you can probably point out to them in chorus, say like, hey, isn't it weird that Muhammad is you kind of like a brown skinned, dark haired guy whose name is Muhammad Ali and is pro-Palestine? Like,
I'm not saying that's the only thing.
Aren't we being a little,
no,
you know,
I mean, like, that
this
was something that we had brought up in court, you know, like my attorney like pointed at me and said, look at him.
Yeah.
He is a brown man with a beard
and then,
with the name Muhammad. And like,
yeah,
you don't think that it's weird that he's one of the only 2 people that is like still being charged for this. And then Judge Lazara's response to this, if I might say, was like very, very funny. She was like, well, I have an ethnically sounding name too. Like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, their response is going to be, well, I mean, I'm assuming, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm assuming proving intent based on like going on someone like on racial background is like super hard, right? And they're like, and it's so easy for them to just swat it away. And I remember the prosecutor in court saying, do you know how many brown Muslim people I've defended in my career? Blah blah blah.
Wait, seriously? They said that?
Yeah, and
yes. I don't know. That was so crazy because that was when I was testifying and I was like basically talking about like, as you know, like Muhammad's partner, I've been seeing this case. I've been at nearly every single, I think I've been at every single hearing. And have seen every single one like throughout the entire process, and I'm here talking about how like, it feels as though, Muhammad is being, singled out as a product of being like brown Muslim man, very publicly, pro-Palestine, and like talking about how like difficult that is to see how, what's the word that I used? It's like the antagonism that the prosecution has demonstrated. And then the prosecutor comes up to me, he's like, well, Miss Siddiqui, how many people would you be surprised to find out that I have, prosecuted? I don't even know what he said. Like, it's some crazy shit of like, would you be surprised that I've prosecuted a variety of different people with a variety of different skin tones and racial backgrounds and all this stuff? Would you be surprised to find out how long I've been practicing law? It was just the most patronizing shit to hear in a courtroom where you're talking about, these very reasonable and valid claims that, hey, in this instance, it's really, really fucking weird that, the one of 2 people who is remaining in this case and is like also one of the only people who is a brown Muslim person who has been charged with felonies.
Yeah, and also, okay, let's grant them that it's not racially motivated, but then it kind of begs the question for why you've had so many recusals, why this is being continued on and on and on, why they seem so adamant about not giving you anything like ARD or any of the other pleas that they've offered to other people. So why is this case, if it's not racially motivated, so let's take that off the table, it sure as hell does seem ideologically motivated, because we do seem to be applying the rules differently, and we can't always just circularly reason back to, well, this is just how the process goes, because clearly the process can go differently in other cases that are very similar.
Yeah, precisely. And I mean, I can touch upon this just very, very quickly before we have to finish. But the prosecution on this case, they have, I don't know if they've done it willingly or unwillingly. It probably is unwillingly, like they're very full of themselves. But the reason that they've claimed to continue prosecuting me in this case, we've found out over the course of 2 hearings. The first one was the selective prosecution hearing in Judge Lazara's courtroom. And the second was the motion to remove the district attorney from this case and install the Pennsylvania Attorney General. And in both of these cases, my attorney has noted that the prosecution claims to be prosecuting me for the fact, or for the claim, right, that A, I was a leader at protests, and B, that I have a previous criminal history. So the first thing is true. I was a leader at a variety of protests in the Palestine movement. The second is not true, right? Like, I have never had a criminal history before this incident. And this is something that the police officers that are prosecuting me, as well as the district attorney, know. So to say that, well, this individual who has no previous criminal history, but we are claiming that they do, and is also a leader at protests. And that is a express reason for as to why we are not offering them an ARD or a plea deal, indicates or implies that the DA is prosecuting me because of my position within Palestine activism and not with any real desire to, like, quote unquote, respect the wishes of any alleged victim or to prosecute in the interest of the public good. And if that is true, then we have a prosecution that is engaging in this case and is directly suppressing free speech and First Amendment activity.
Yeah. And I think maybe we can just wrap up on, I think you put it very well. I know you have to go, but the implications of you being prosecuted for these charges, again, after kind of we discussed it being just so patently ideologically motivated to silence free speech. What do you see as the implications? I want to get your thoughts on that. And then before we wrap up, I just kind of also want to hear from both of you about how do you want your communities to show up for you and the other defendants? And what have you found especially helpful or kind of brings you peace in these times?
Can I add one sort of cheesy professor thing? I'd love to hear like what you're thinking about next in life, like just in terms of like future education, future goals, maybe based on this experience.
Yeah. All right. So implications, and then we'll get to the rest of that.
It's not looking good. That's not like a, yeah, no, I don't think that we are heading in a great direction if, like, the state and private institutions are willing to prosecute people to this extent, right? Like, even if people have been, for example, like, even if their charges were reduced or dropped, right? They still had to deal with the legal system. They still had to deal with either getting attorneys or contacting the public defender's office. They had to deal with potentially losing their jobs, going to court dates. Like, there is a very real weight to the criminal justice system, or I apologize, the criminal legal system. And it doesn't bode well for me that that these institutions are willing to go this far and to suppress people to this extent for engaging in free speech.
Quick question. Do you know how many like public dollars have been spent trying to prosecute you by any chance?
God, I wish I knew.
God, I wish we knew, because this is, I'm sure the figure is just stupid. But yeah. Okay. Well, sorry, I don't know if you had more to say on that, but yeah, just kind of moving on to how can people show up?
One thing that I did want to mention as well, sorry, kind of on both points, is that, this is not, Muhammad's situation is not like this one-off thing. It's a pattern that we're seeing both across the country and within the city of Pittsburgh, of the, unfair treatment of those who demonstrate, support for Palestine, those who are Muslim, those who are Arab, those who are brown. And I want to point to, again, like the SJP suspension that has been reinstated, thankfully. But I also want to point to, the like federal cases, associated with students who, or not students of the University of Pittsburgh, but folks who, demonstrated support for Palestine, and how we currently have, a friend who is being incarcerated and held in the Butler County Jail, for federal charges that have been a case that's been continuing over a year as well, who has been facing very similar, unfair procedural treatment on the basis of their brown Muslim identity. And in terms of how people can show up for us in this situation, I'd say learn about and listening to this case and like hearing what we have to say is like a really important and like a huge thing for us, and like spreading awareness about what's been happening, how this is still going on, how these cases have not been resolved, both in Muhammad's situation and also in these federal cases, that I think that it is important that we all continue to stay tapped in with each other, and we continue to stay like in community with each other. Um, and it's been really great, the amount of, support that we've had from folks in Pittsburgh. Like I like at our most recent hearing for that was held, in Judge Avashovic's room. It was just so amazing to see the amount of community support that we received. Both, we had expected the hearing to take place on that day at, I think it was like 8:30 a.m. And we had, 50 something people show up ready for that hearing to take place. And um, come to find out that we hadn't been informed that the hearing was rescheduled to 1 o'clock. And, it was like just devastating to hear it, not just, oh, we didn't know that it was actually later today, but that all of these people had showed up for us at this moment. And we had to tell them, hey, sorry, we don't know if this hearing is going to be happening, at the time that you expected. Like, thank you for showing. But then the 1 p.m. time rolls around, and then, I think 33 folks of the 50 folks who were there still showed up again at 1 p.m. To help sit in for this like multiple hour long hearing, which was just such an amazing thing to see. Like, just such a tapped in and dedicated community, willing and ready to show up, not just once that day, but twice. It was just like, it genuinely, is something that we're always so grateful for, and means so much to both of us. So,
Yeah. Do you have time to answer that last question about what you're kind of doing next in terms of education or life plans, or?
For sure, yeah. I am planning on taking the LSAT in January.
Oh, nice,
So
dude! You're gonna make a great lawyer. I can already
You're
tell.
kind of already learning quite a bit on the job.
yeah. It's a very intimate experience with the legal system, I would say.
I have books that I highly recommend if you're looking for good LSAT books.
Yeah, absolutely. I will definitely take a look at those. But I'm taking the LSAT in January. I'm just going through the very tedious process of completing applications right now. Um, Number one school is Temple in Philly, so go Birds, I guess.
Nice.
But yeah, otherwise, I'm trying to do what I can in Pittsburgh, while I am still here, because this is a place that I love very much, and there are people here that I love very much. So yeah, trying to stay involved as much as I can.
Great. Hiba, what about you?
I'm currently applying to master's in social work programs. I've been taking a year off after graduating from the University of Pittsburgh in May 2025. So I'm currently working at the Women's Center and Shelter as a direct services advocate. So I'm hoping to continue some of that community mental health work and also get my license to become a therapist. So that's the plan. And hopefully we will both be in Philadelphia for our education. So
Yeah.
it's
Awesome,
exciting.
y'all. We love Philly. Maybe
Yeah.
one day we'll make it there too.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of
Yeah.
two more noble pursuits or purposes, and I hope the state can also see that and maybe take it to heart in its future actions. But Muhammad and Hiba, thank you so much for your time and for talking through this situation with us. Yeah, we really, really appreciate it, and we hope that people listen and share it as widely as you can. But thanks for coming on.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.